Fear is ignorance. These are the words of Ralph Waldo Emerson. He was an American writer. To a lot of people, this might sound like an accusation or an insult, but to me, it sounds more like a diagnosis. That a lot of the fear that human beings experience comes from a place of ignorance. You know, the unknown. Because you've never experienced it, you are afraid of it. Because you've experienced it before, you think it will happen again, but on a worse level. And so this ignorance that surrounds us, that is our reality, creates an environment of fear. So for me, that statement, fear is ignorance, is actually the best definition of fear I've ever heard. But maybe that's just for me personally. Maybe for you, you like the more technical idea of what fear is. For some people, fear is an emotional response to a perceived threat or a danger, right? The way that your body carries you when you are in a place. Maybe you're about to be in an accident, or somebody breaks into your house, or something is falling. So for those of us here in Indonesia, we get to a season in the year where the buildings move, right? Minor or major earthquakes. And so fear becomes an emotional response. In fact, somebody said that fear lives rent-free in our minds. And the reason for that is because all fear emanates from the mind. In the brain is a part called the amygdala. The amygdala is actually responsible for the way that you sense the world around you. It deals with all the other parts of your brain, talking about memory, learning, and the senses, your 5 senses. Your amygdala connects your body with the world around you. Unfortunately, most of the time, it causes us to fear because, once again, of ignorance, what we don't know. Somebody came up with what they called the 12 core fears. And from these 12, as I read out what they are, I want you to figure out whether one of them refers to you. Because as we have this discussion on the podcast episode, I want you to understand that fear makes or breaks you. There are fears that are good, that are realistic, and actually keep us from harm and danger. But there are fears that rob us of the experiences of life. And so this is what I want you to understand. The 12 core fears. Number 1, the fear of failure. I think we can all identify with that one. And it's interesting that not only is the fear of failure one of the core fears, but actually the fear of success on the other side. Number 3, the fear of rejection. Oh yeah, the fear of rejection has paralyzed many people from experiencing a new job, a new place, or a new relationship because of the fear of rejection. The fear of not being good or smart enough. There's always somebody just better than us. And that thought keeps us from striving or trying. The fear of not having enough. We live in a consumer age. We live in an age where people are always advertising what they have and what they've bought or what they've acquired. And so the rest of us who are doom scrolling on social media have this feeling of, maybe I need that. Maybe I don't have enough of this. And so the fear of not having enough. The fear of being different. Now this one is interesting because we live at an age where people are told to think for themselves and to do what they want. But at the same time, we realize the same people who are telling us to be different make us become like them. And so if you try to go in a different direction, you are judged because you choose to be different. And so people want to conform rather than transform. The fear of losing control. We live in a world where so much is happening all at once. And so the fear of not being able to control your environment, the outcomes of your life or your circumstances paralyzes a lot of people. The fear of being alone. Again, this is very ironic because we are so bombarded by information. We are surrounded by people, not just in the real world, but in cyberspace, through our social media connections, through all our friends on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook and all these other platforms that keep popping up. We are constantly bombarded by people, and yet some still feel alone. You're in a crowd, but you feel alone. The fear of illness or the fear of being sick. Listen, ever since the pandemic, everybody is so paranoid about their health, and for good cause in most circumstances. But just the fear of, maybe I could be suffering from this. People go online, they self-diagnose and they self-medicate, all because they're trying to be healthy, but it's coming from a place of fear. The fear of love. We're going to talk about where the fear of love comes from in a moment, but I want you to understand that this falls under the 12 core fears, the fear of love, whether it's to love or to be loved. Maybe there's a pain that came with it. Maybe there's a traumatic experience before. And so one fears the idea of love, the fear of being significant. The fear of being insignificant, right? You live your life as best as you can. But as you're looking back and you're looking forward, you're thinking to yourself, maybe a time will come when I'll be forgotten. Nobody will know my name. Nobody will know what I did, what I accomplished, or what I tried to be or to become. And so the fear of insignificance affects people. And finally, the one and final core fear is the fear of change. A few years ago on our Activated YouTube channel, I did a couple of videos talking about change. And I want to revisit it because that was in the heart of the pandemic, and I think there's a lot that has come out after. Change has become our reality, and there's so much to say about that as we move forward here on the podcast. Where does fear really come from? What is the source of fear? There are a couple of things that we can look at when considering where fear comes from. One of them, I call it inherited fear. Let me paint a picture for you. Think of a mother who's afraid of spiders. She's been afraid of spiders all her life as a little girl. Every time she sees a spider, she's jumping up and down, she's screaming, she's jumping on the furniture. And all of a sudden, she has a daughter or a son. And the child keeps observing the mother react to small, harmless spiders. I'm not talking about tarantulas or black widows. I mean your garden variety, homegrown little spider that you see on the wall or on the ceiling. And the way she reacts to the spider affects the child. And so the child starts to react the same. That is what I call inherited fear. Now that's a simple example. But think about it in a more serious place where a parent has been hurt by their partner. A parent has lost their partner to death or sickness. A child has watched their parents suffer from cancer and deal with the pain of loss. That observing nature that the child has, watching mommy cry, watching daddy cry, watching their siblings suffer, makes them afraid of life because of what they've seen. And so fear is passed on, not necessarily through the genes, but through observation. That's why I call it inherited fear. The other thing I want you to consider as a reason why people experience fear is social biases. What do I mean by social biases? I mean that from society, we learn our values, we adopt our beliefs, and we catch behaviors. And so there's a way of doing things that becomes common to the community or society. And so when you start to think about being different, that causes fear and anxiety. For example, if you are raised in a culture that emphasizes conformity and fitting in, where everybody talks the same, everybody dresses the same, everybody thinks in a certain direction, it may affect you when you try to be different. But let me pause and say this. Sometimes fitting in is not bad, because fitting in is how we communicate. It's how we relate. It's how we identify each other. But then there's a harmful form of fitting in that can cause one to stagnate in their growth and not experience life the way that they should. And so social biases can hurt you because now you try to be like everybody else because that's what society has said. And yet being different can actually benefit society. Again, I must emphasize, I'm not talking about being different because you want to stir the boat, you want to rock the boat or cause problems. But you want to be different because that's the way you were created. That's how you've conditioned yourself to contribute to the world, and you want to show up for people. And sometimes that requires leaving. Sometimes it requires being different. Sometimes it requires learning a different language and experiencing something that others did not. It's like coming from a family of doctors and you decide to be a musician, or coming from a doctor of people who want to be lawyers, people who want to adopt a career path where you rise up the ladder and you just want to be a teacher, you want to be a carpenter, you want to be a janitor. All those are noble professions, but we struggle because you are going against social expectations, and that may affect you. What else causes fear? Ideological bubbles. If there's anything I've witnessed when it came to social media, the world of comments, likes, and follows, is that people get stuck following the majority. There's a fear to be different because the moment you adopt a certain ideological perspective on life, your life is in that bubble. We see it in schools, we see it in workplaces, and mostly we see it online, that the moment you go against the grain or the thinking, you are labeled as an enemy and you get cancelled simply because you decided, I want to think differently. So a lot of people adopt the ideological bubbles of others simply because it allows them to fit in. You abandon seeking a different perspective, you abandon seeking a broader understanding of the world simply because this is how everybody else is doing it. Therefore, I might as well be the same. Something else that causes fear: childhood trauma. Abuse as a child, whether it was physical, whether it was emotional, whether it was the absence of a parent, whether it was losing somebody that you loved, getting involved in an accident, watching a horrific murder, somebody breaking into your home, somebody threatening you, a teacher, a friend, a relative. All these are examples of what childhood trauma looks like. And so what happens is somebody grows up struggling with relationships. They struggle to communicate. They avoid confrontation. They avoid standing up for themselves. Whenever they're in challenging situations, they find it difficult to stand up for themselves. That's a childhood trauma. Let me share a personal one that you might find funny, but it's real for me. At my age right now, I still can't swim. That's right. I do not know how to swim. It's not a stereotype, but I can tell you where it started. For those of you who are either my age or you like to watch vintage movies, you might know about Jaws. Jaws is a Spielberg franchise movie series based on sharks that are killing people in vacation spots and in the water, of course. And so watching this at a young age, I remember I was probably 7 or 8 years old when I watched Jaws. Now there's more better produced movies about sharks. In fact, the most recent one is called Meg, right? With Jason Statham, everybody loves him. So because I watched these shark movies, I became afraid of being in large bodies of water or putting my head under the water. And for all that time through high school and even through college, I refused to learn how to swim. Now I want to, but that fear is still there because of a childhood trauma of watching something I shouldn't have. Here's another one: conditioned perceptions. In other words, if you spend your time watching the news all the time, if you spend your time always doom scrolling things that are negative, things that make it seem like you're not good enough, your weight is not where it should be, you don't have enough muscle, you don't have enough money, you're not driving the right car, you get what is known as conditioned perception. All right, you consistently expose yourself to negative or fear-inducing content to the point that you now think that everything is bad. Life will never work out, everything is doom and gloom, and that's the state of your world. And I'm saying to you that you gotta make sure that at least you don't start the day watching news or scrolling social media, at least the first hour, because whatever you consume within the first hour will determine the rest of your day, and technically or possibly the rest of your life. So those are the things that I've found that can create fear in a person's life. You look at them and decide which one is for you. I have one more. I call it the mediocrity trap. Being comfortable, being in the comfort zone, right? You are so used to a pattern of behavior. You're so used to an average existence. You never pursue success. You never pursue promotion. You never want to be outside of what you've known. Now, for some people, that's fine. But at some point, human nature demands growth. Human nature demands an experience where you can be better than where you are right now. A growth mindset, as they call it. So for some people, mediocrity is a safe place because it prevents them from failing. It prevents them from being judged by other people. And so they become comfortable in this place where they are, and they're trapped. And they're afraid to try anything else. In fact, speaking of failure is probably one of the greatest contributors to fear. In fact, I call failure fear's favorite cousin. They are so related to each other. They go hand in hand like a hand in a glove. Why is failure such a trigger for fear? Number one, you get afraid of being judged or rejected by people. Because you think that if I perform this thing, or if I do this, or if I try to answer a question in school, or if I try to push for this project, I might fail and get judged and rejected. And for some people, when they fail, they don't want to do it again because they don't want to make the same mistake again. And so perfectionism steps in and they never try anything. For others, they're afraid of negative consequences. What if I ask for this and I don't get it and then I get rebuked for it? What if I try to push for this, it doesn't work out and things become worse than they are already? And so, together with fear comes self-doubt and low self-esteem, and by the time you're done, you are less than a shell of the person you used to be. The fear of disappointment, unmet expectations, and so on and so on. These are the things that cause fear. I'm sure as you're listening to me right now, you're thinking, wow, what doesn't cause fear? Now let me show you what happens when you give in to fear. Because it's not enough just to show you what causes it. Here's what happens if you don't take the steps to mitigate or deal with fear in your life. Here's what happens. You become stagnant in your life. You will never move. You get stuck. Same house, same restaurant, same places, same friends, same experiences. You keep watching the world around you change. I don't know if you've ever watched those time-lapse videos on YouTube where somebody is in one position but everything around them keeps changing. For a lot of people, that's what life is like. You get stuck in the same place, nothing is changing, nothing is moving simply because of fear. You miss out on opportunities. Think about it. How many opportunities have come your way? But you've always had a good excuse as to why you didn't want to take it. Or somebody else is more qualified, or maybe not right now, maybe next year, or when I'm more prepared and when I have the qualifications to do this, that, and the other. And so you miss opportunities simply because you're afraid. Limited potential. Because you don't try, you don't grow. Because you don't take the training that is needed. You don't keep putting yourself out there. Together with Frankie, who's right with me right now in the studio, you have no idea how much time it takes to set this thing up and keep trying the sound and the audio. Most people are uncomfortable with that because they want to get it right the first time. And so you limit your potential simply because of fear. Another thing that fear causes is regret. I've watched a lot of videos on YouTube where old people are interviewed and they're asked, what is the one thing that you regret? In fact, I've had these conversations with people in real life over 60 or 70 years of age. More often than not, the thing they regret the most is not what they did, it's what they didn't do because of fear. That is the greatest evidence of regret. Not the things you do that have negative consequence or results. It's the things that you never do that create the most amount of regret. And that comes from a place of fear. Low self-esteem again, unfulfilled dreams, lack of progress. All these are what happens when you give in to fear. So how do we deal with this? Right? How do we go on the offensive? How do we attack fear in our lives? How do we challenge what it throws at us? I want to give you 3 things that I believe can be of benefit to you as you consider how I can deal with fear. Because if I just tell you what fear is, if I just tell you where fear comes from and the results and walk away, then you become a victim of fear again. How can you go on the offensive against fear? Number 1, verify but do not validate. Let me say that again. Verify but do not validate. What that means is you must confirm that the fear is real. There are certain things that we must be afraid of. For example, if I jump into shark-infested waters, I have every reason to be afraid. Okay, that's a valid fear. But what I shouldn't do is validate that fear when I'm in a pool or when I'm in the shower. It doesn't make any sense. There are no sharks in there. So by verifying that it's a real fear, that's good. But don't validate it every single day of your life, because now you get paralyzed. Just because people in this company were bad to you doesn't mean that the same thing will happen. Just because you experience bullying in this school doesn't mean you'll experience it in that school. You must verify that the fear is real. Somebody pointing a gun at you, that's real. But thinking that everybody has a gun and wants to shoot you, that's unrealistic. You are validating a fear that doesn't exist. So once again, don't ignore your fears, but rather find a way to explain them away and rationalize that not every single moment is about that. So in other words, don't delude yourself, dilute the fear. What else can you do to go on the offensive against fear? Admit but do not absorb. Admit but do not absorb. In other words, tell somebody about that fear. Talk to somebody that you trust. Get help. There are some people where this podcast is not enough and they need professional help. Go see a psychologist. Talk to a counselor. Talk to a pastor. Talk to a leader. Somebody that can coach you through that fear and help you get to a place where you are not only managing it, but you have overcome it. So you must admit it to somebody, but don't through repetition absorb it. See, when some people talk about the past, rather than them reflecting on it, it becomes a reality. So when I say don't absorb it, I mean don't make it a part of your life. Don't use victim speak. Every time you talk to people about it, you are talking from a place of, oh, this is my life, I'm afraid of this, I'll never try anything else. No, share it as if you want to overcome it. And with time, I'm sure that you will. Now, the one that I can identify with is this third one. I call it confront, but do not conform to your fear. Confront it, but do not conform. What does that mean? So in 2018, my wife and I, she was pregnant at the time. We had the privilege of going to Australia to be a part of a wedding in Uluru. Now, Uluru, for those of you that might know Australia, is in the outback. In fact, it's where you find that famous mountain that everybody goes to when they visit Australia in Uluru. Now, to go to Uluru, you got to fly to Melbourne, and then from Melbourne, you jump into a smaller plane that takes you into this semi-desert place. Very hot and dry, so such a different environment from what we have here in Indonesia, in Jakarta. Now, in the bigger plane, I love to fly, right? I love flying. Even though I'm afraid of heights, but when you're in the plane, your depth perception is different. You can't really calculate height or distance, and I'm okay with that. But I'm also claustrophobic, right? Talk about fear. The small plane, it shakes and rattles way more than a regular plane does. In fact, it's one of the tourist experiences when the plane is about to land in the very small strip in Uluru, that the shaking is part of the fun. It wasn't fun for me. It was like being in a roller coaster ride. My eyes were closed and I was just scared. But here's the funny thing. While going through it and when we landed, I was afraid of the takeoff, but I noticed that when we took off a few days after the wedding, that my fear was a little bit less. Because when you confront a fear, you become used to the experience and you no longer have to conform to it. So what is it that you're afraid of today? Is it public speaking? Speak more. Is it standing in front of a camera? Do it more. Is it selling something to somebody? Some people have the fear of selling. Do it as often as possible and fail as often, because the more you confront it, you will not conform to it and it won't become of who you are. Listen to this idea. Confronting your fears is not about putting yourself in life-threatening situations. It's about taking yourself out of thinking that every situation is life-threatening. I promise you. Stand in front of a crowd, not life-threatening. Jumping into a plane and going to a new place, as long as that place is safe and of benefit to you, not threatening. Getting into a relationship, as long as it's with somebody that you can grow with, not threatening. Going to the gym, eating healthy, sleeping early, all these things that we fear not doing or doing are not always life-threatening. And the moment you can confront that fear, you get yourself into a better place. The Bible says in 2 Timothy chapter 1 verse 7, "For we have not been given the spirit of fear, but of love, of power, and a sound mind." See, when it comes to confronting fear, if you forget anything else I've said, these three things will help you. Power. There is more inside of you than outside of you that can help you confront many fears in your life. There's a power above you that can see you through the worst experiences of life. I'm one person who will never ever discount the experiences you've had in this life. The childhood traumas, the accidents and the losses along the way, the failed attempts at doing something and people judged you for it. Those things are real. But here's the power you have. A new day, try again, find somebody to help you, get the help that you need along the way. That's power. And God is a power that can help activate faith and not fear. Let's talk about love. The more you love yourself, the more love you have for others. And the more you put yourself out there to love others, the more you understand what love is. That even when you don't receive it back, you are comfortable because, as the Bible says, love your neighbor as yourself. You love you so you can love others. So love is a good mitigation against fear. But most of what I like the last one, a sound mind. Some other versions say self-discipline. A sound mind is somebody who is not only rational, but also lives by faith. A sound mind is somebody that looks at the facts in front of them, doesn't consider the unknown, but looks at what they do know. A sound mind is somebody who is able to look at their life right now, deal with today, to deal with today's problems, today's success, today's people, and not think about what they can control tomorrow. In fact, a sound mind is understanding that in life there are things you can control and there are things you can't control. Your job is to focus on what you can control. So that's it. That's how you confront fear. What is your fear today? What is it that is stopping you from living an activated life? What is it that is stopping you from getting that job, getting together with that girl or that guy, getting to the place where your health becomes important enough for you to give up the bad habits? How can you replace entertainment with education? How can you get to the place where you take that step to walk with God and not be afraid of the outcome? You need to confront fear because it's not always your friend. Sometimes it's an enemy. I pray that God will bless you and that as we strive to live activated lives, we will confront the fears that we have. I'll see you in the next episode.